All right. Good evening, everybody. My name is Stephen Rabinowitz alongside Jay Kaplan and Anthony Strait, and welcome to another edition of On the Sports Lines for August 27th, 2020. Yeah, we've reached our last show in August, which is mind-blowing to me.
Yeah,
Anyway,
where did summer go?
it never actually came. So tonight is a special type of show. Originally, we had NBA playoff talk, NHL talk, and a midseason report for baseball. And then the events of this whole week happened, stemming from the shooting of Jacob Blake, a man who was shot 7 times in the back. We can always get into the discussion about that later, but that's not what this is all about tonight. This is all about social injustice and where we stand in America sports-wise. So with all of that came the events of just yesterday, Wednesday, August 26th. The Milwaukee Bucks, as this took place in Kenosha, Wisconsin, Milwaukee, the home state of the Bucks, decided to boycott their game against the Orlando Magic. The Orlando Magic boycotted in solidarity, and soon after, the entire NBA slate for the night was canceled. This had an effect on all sports. Baseball canceled a few games last night, canceled 7 more today. The NBA schedule was wiped out for Thursday, and there was a talk that the season would be over, although it turned out that the season will be right back on track, either tomorrow or Saturday. NHL, after a day of questionable actions, officially canceled their Thursday and Friday slates. WNBA has canceled tonight's slate and yesterday's slate. They might play tomorrow. Tennis, they did not play today as they prepare for the U.S. Open on Monday. Sports is at the forefront and also not at the forefront of America right now. So tonight, the whole entire show will be dedicated to everything that's happened this week and where do we go from here. So I have 6 questions for you, and if we have time, we can freeform about a lot of different stuff. So I'm going to start with Anthony. The very simple question. Did you agree with the boycott and why?
Yes, because you know why? This is exactly why these the players have the platform that they have. And I know you and I have kind of gone back on Kyrie Irving's suggestion that they shouldn't play at all because the games itself would take away from the whole point of bringing attention to social justice. And to an extent, he was right. You know, I think people were starting to settle into the games a little bit, that the message was starting to get lost to some extent. But then you watch the basketball games. I mean, whether you liked it or not, there was Black Lives Matter on the basketball court. There were messages on the back of the jerseys, like say her name, or change, or even in some cases educational reform. You know, there were messages behind it, not just the names that was on the back of the jerseys. But at the end of the day, you gotta think about it like this. For all the talk that I was hearing, like as far as criticism from social media, as always, about how they should be appreciative of that they're in a country where they can make millions of dollars. But at the end of the day, if they weren't basketball players, they would be average African American citizens. And what happened to Jacob Blake or even George Floyd could have easily happened to them. You know, I think about with Skylar Diggins-Smith, who obviously the WNBA has been at the forefront of bringing attention to what happened to Breonna Taylor. She tweeted yesterday that, Jacob Blake could have been her husband. He's 29. They have a 1-year-old son, and she said, at what age does he stop being cute and stop being threatening and intimidating? And that is the fear that a lot of African Americans have to deal with. It's an uncomfortable conversation, and obviously I have a young nephew that my brother's gonna have to talk to with them. Not even the person to be. It's even what do you do when you're stopped by police officers? And you think about, do any other race have to have that conversation? But I love the fact that the players are not shutting up and dribbling. They're they're reminding them, what the Milwaukee Bucks did was they reminded America that, you know what, we're not just here to entertain you. We are human beings. We live in the same society. We came from a society and from a culture and from a community where this has happened and became commonplace. Jimmy Butler even said before the bubble even started that if he wasn't in the NBA, it could easily be him. It could be any one of those players. And the fact that it resonated, and the fact that they got the support from not just their peers in the NBA, but other sports. You know, I'm looking at Clayton Kershaw's quote from yesterday. As a white player on this team, how can we show support? What's something tangible that we can do to help our black brothers on this team? We felt the best thing to do was to support that and not play. And that was prior to the Dodgers postponing not playing last night's game. And you think about that, and it was a reminder to America that at least the people who just tune in and just want to entertain, that at the end of the day, these athletes have a platform and they should have the right to use it and to put the message out there. Do I think it was too short? No, because you know what it is? It brought the attention that it absolutely that it was driven to do. Because you think about the reaction you're getting from a certain administration. I think we're going to get further into that a little more. But also, more importantly, you know, for me, it makes me smile when I see J.R. Smith post on Instagram. You didn't want to hear us. Now you can't see us.
See us.
So basically, you ignored our calls. You ignored our speeches, our conversations, and the fact that we're trying to do it in a peaceful manner. So you know what? Now let's remind you that, you know what? We're not just here to entertain you. We're here. Yes, this is our jobs. We play basketball. We get that. We play baseball. In the case of Naomi Osaka, yeah, she's a tennis player, but what she said adequately, and I agree, before she's an athlete, she's a black woman. And it's a reminder in the last 24 hours that these athletes have the platform, but they have more, I feel like, more of an influence on our culture and our society than politicians do. And I'm like I said, I love the protests. I love the fact that young people are taking the bull by the horns and making their presence felt and making what they need to hear, what they need to say heard. And they're doing it in a variety of forms. And it gives me hope as far as what can be changed down the line.
Yeah, you know, I mean, Anthony, you said it as well as it could be said. I'm never going to have, I mean, I said this back on our George Floyd show. I'm never going to have exactly the same perspective as you will. Do I understand a little bit about persecution? Yes, I'm Jewish. My religion and my culture is rife with, you know, what other...
And we've had the conversation about the Deshaun Jackson and anti-Semitism, which is also somewhat overlooked.
Right. I mean, so I know what it's like to a certain extent, but I'm never going to have the same perspective that you do, because I'm never going to be in the situations. I'm never truly going to have to worry about those situations like you do, like the guys in the NBA do, and to a other extent in the NFL. You know, to your question, Rabbi, do I agree with the boycott? Yes. And whether or not resuming play this weekend means it's too short? No, I don't think it is. I think it's right. I know that LeBron and some of the guys on the Lakers and some of the guys on the Clippers just wanted to say, that's it, we're done, cancel the season.
Which they changed their mind after kind of thinking it through another 12
hours. Yes, I mean,
hours.
honestly, and that is, and it goes to something I'm going to talk about later in the show, the comparison between the NBA's reaction and the NHL's lack of reaction. But this is, I'm not surprised by the raw emotion that it engendered in these players. You know, starting with George Hill's statement, you know, I mean, and I put some of it here. The part that really stood out to me, it's just sickening, it's heartless, It's an effed up situation. Unlike you, Rabbi, I don't want to drop an F-bomb on this show. As I said, you're supposed to look at the police to protect and serve. Now it's looked at as harass or shoot. To almost take a guy's life, thank God he's alive. I know the cops are probably upset that he's alive because I know they surely tried to kill him. But to almost take a guy's life, especially in front of one's kids that wasn't resisting, in his back at point blank range, is a heartless and gutless situation. We need some justice for that. And you know what? That pretty much sums up how they all feel. I mean, in the wake of George Floyd, a lot of them were skeptical, and were hesitant about maybe coming into the bubble and isolating themselves from the rest of the world for the sole purpose of finishing out the season and doing the playoffs and, going for the OB and all that. I don't think as much as it may the situation, and they've done their best, the NBA's done an amazing job to make it tolerable for them. You know that some guys are probably frustrated with the fact that they've been away from their families as long as they have. Is this what sparked maybe the rage or the anger or the frustration that had been building up from that? Maybe. But even if they were not inside the bubble, and even if we'd had a regular season and this was the off season, had this happened, I think the outrage would have been just the same. The difference is where it's happening while basketball is still being played. So to have these guys walk out, I'm not surprised they did that. I don't see how they could continue to play. I mean, I don't know if you guys watched when it finally came down. I had my TV on NBA TV, which then shifted to the TNT studio. And to watch Kenny Smith talk about how about how this all made him feel, and he did his own boycott by walking out on the show because he just couldn't be there anymore. This shows you that, and the reactions you get from players in other sports, and I wrote down a couple of them. I mean, you talk about, here's one that stood out for me. This is Adrian Amos, who's a Packers defensive back, put up a tweet there. The penalty of disobedience shouldn't be death. I mean, dude, this is what it's come to. And I don't know if you can put it any better than that to put a title on what this situation is. I mean, and we talked about this on the other show. We're like, these guys can no longer just shut up and dribble or just play sports. Ken Rosenthal wrote an interesting article about baseball players finding their voice, where we talked about in the past how baseball's individual players never really seem to open their mouths, when situations like this occurred. But they're starting to. They did it with George Floyd. They're doing it more and more. There's a quote from the Cubs' Jason Hayward from back in July where he says, "I wish I could stick to sports." And Rosenthal's follow-up to that was, he can't and we can't, not when racism persists and police keep shooting unarmed black people, and fair-minded people just want to scream. And he's right. Because how are we in a country where this is still being allowed to happen? And I'm going to detour a little bit only because Mike Pence said something that made it into a Rolling Stone article today that kind of plays to this. Rolling Stone called it him doubling down on the propaganda about how if Joe Biden is elected, the country's going to be less safe. When what he's really saying is that it's going to be less safe for white people, because considering all of the violence that's being perpetrated on black people in this country, for him to say that, couldn't it be any more obvious that the people in power right now don't give a rat's ass about the people of Anthony's color? I mean, come on. How did they had to walk out, and the rest of the sports world had to follow them. There's nothing else that, it had to be done. It had to be. A statement had to be made more than just whatever was on the back of their jerseys, more than what was, Black Lives Matter across the court and all that. Something more needed to be done. This was it. I applaud them. And as much as I hated not being able to watch wall-to-wall basketball the last couple of days, this is what needed to be done.
I agree with all of this with a caveat. Let's start with the kind of what I agree with. I agree this should have been done. And this was kind of floated about 2 days ago, it was originally the Raptors and the Celtics who were thinking of boycotting their game tonight. It kind of died down a little bit with the chatter, and then all of a sudden, at around like 2:30, 3 o'clock, you hear rumors of the Bucks doing the same thing. And I think it's the perfect starting point to everything. And the Bucks walking out is a very, very bold and, in my opinion, brave statement. I think what happened afterwards, they got on the phone with the, I think, assistant district attorney or the
lieutenant governor.
Lieutenant governor of Wisconsin. They came out 8 o'clock. They were in their locker rooms for almost 4 hours. They came out 8 o'clock, made a bunch of statements saying, this is what we want. We want to see action done because of this shooting. I think the one huge thing is there needs to be obtainable goals when this happens. It's not just enough to boycott and then go back to work 2 days later. I think there needs to be obtainable goals, and as much as the NBA has done most of what they could, and I've heard today, I think Adrian Wojnarowski tweeted some owners are like, we have to do this, we don't want to do this. And then in a meeting earlier tonight, the players said, why don't the owners be more proactive than reactive? And I think as we'll get to that later on tonight, I think this is going to be the start of people being more proactive about this subject. I don't think it means anything just to have Black Lives Matter written on a court. I mean, is it a great gesture? Yes, it is. But there's so much more that needs to be done. And to be fair, when everyone went down to the bubble, I don't think anything was going to be solved. I didn't think anything was going to be stopped in all of America with what has happened, because we're near an election. Everything is going to get more divisive. And eventually, when we reach that point of November, I think no matter who wins, we're going to get some of the most divisive marches and divisive language that we've seen. I think social media has, again, been a wreck this week. I've almost wanted to deactivate everything about my social media account and never, ever look at it again. As someone who plays the middle of all these situations and tries to see every little point of every argument, I can't do it anymore. I really can't. And back to what we've seen in sports, I think the domino effect had to be done. Basketball had to cancel everything for today and for yesterday and now today. They go back tomorrow, okay. They go back on Saturday, okay. I think they needed to do it just for this long. And I'll answer that second question, which is this too short of a protest? No, because I think eventually you want to focus on what has happened in America. And I think the longer the boycott goes, the story becomes the people who are still in the bubble or who are still protesting. And I think the focus can easily be focused back on what's been happening in America with, I hate to say the word distraction, but a distraction happening in Orlando, Florida. Baseball will go back to normal. I think it's very interesting how 3 or 4 years ago, there's only one player who kneeled.
Yeah, Maxwell
from Oakland.
Actually, yes.
And now, as we just saw tonight with the Mets and the Marlins, everybody left the field, and all they did is put a Black Lives Matter t-shirt on home plate, and what is probably the best thing the Mets have done in years. But otherwise, there are just gesture after gesture that has worked out. We'll get to the NHL in a little bit. We've seen what's happened in the WNBA all season. They've been dedicating it to say her name. I know you're going to bring it up later, but the little tribute that they did last night to Jacob Blake was powerful. I think the WNBA has been at the forefront of social justice for years, and I didn't think that was no different. MLS cancel games. I think this is a very good move by everybody. This is the day heard around the world yesterday, the day when the coronavirus took over sports, and the day when social justice took over sports. I think we'll get back to the same sports schedule that we've known and loved, whether it be Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. But what we've seen tonight and yesterday and today is something that's been very interesting and powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, to me, guys, and I think, Rabbi, I said this to you earlier today, the Mystics wearing white T-shirts that spelled out Jacob Blake's name on the front and had 7 bullet holes on the back. I mean, that's about as powerful a nonverbal statement gets.
I think it's more powerful than a verbal statement, to be honest with you. I think, like I said, I think the
Maybe right.
WNBA is
No, I mean, I saw the there was a picture on Instagram, and it was a top and bottom, where the top was the front of the T-shirts and the back was the bullet holes. And I'm looking at that and go, wow. I mean, that's kind of like the only thing you can say is just, wow.
And again, the message is going to be seen on the court as much as it is going to be seen off the court. Now, Anthony, by the way, I forgot to ask you, do you think this boycott was too short? Would you like to have seen it gone on any longer than it's probably going to be?
No, I don't think it was too short, because evidently, like you said, the story would become more of how long the guys are protesting, and that would take away from from why they were protesting. And whether go back to work Friday or tomorrow or Saturday for that matter, I think the point being made and the fact and the solidarity that you're seeing across all the major sports. And like I said, tonight, you know what, I've had jokes about being a New York Mets fan, and I gotta be honest, tonight was probably one of the most proudest moments I've had. And being a fan of that team, and we know I'm a fan of that team for so long, and you know what, and watching them win a championship when I was younger and get to the World Series. But tonight, I think really made me more honored and proud to be a fan of the team that I basically watched alongside my dad, when I was younger. So, yeah, it was a really powerful moment to see it live and to see Gary Cohen and Keith Hernandez's reaction to it.
Anthony,
really
I gotta tell you,
it really drove it home.
Yeah, I mean, look, you guys know I'm a Yankees fan, but I'm a proud New Yorker. So anytime any one of our sports team, whether it's the one I root the hardest for, or the one I keep one eye on from a semi-removed position, anytime any of them does something like this, it makes me proud to be a New Yorker, because that's not a baseball, that's not a Mets thing, that's not a baseball thing, that's not a sports thing, that's a human thing, and to me that's a New York thing. That's that's New Yorkers, man. When it all starts to go pear-shaped and go sideways, we've seen it time and time again. New Yorkers of every race, creed, color, whatever you want to call it, background, we come together and we recognize things like that. And, I take my hat off to them, because that's also another powerful statement. And to me, it's a very New York thing.
Yeah, I think that statement is probably one of the best statements that I've seen out of any team so far, especially just walking off and just beginning to play and then just walking off and honoring Jackie Robinson and doing a 42-second moment of silence before.
Yeah. I mean, to me, that's.
Yeah, it's something that it resonates, knowing what you're doing for the sport and then knowing what you're doing for society. Okay. Yeah. So the NBA decided after a player meeting last night and then a player meeting this morning, and that player meeting actually didn't take as long as we thought it was going to take. The season was on the brink, as one veteran player would say. I don't know how much I take that at face value, but the NBA has decided they will resume their playoffs. Most likely, it will be on Saturday. There was a little bit of discussion. Lakers and Clippers both originally said, I think we're done for the season, but 12 hours later, they kind of changed their mind as More facts came along and they had a night to sleep about everything else. Basketball has been one of the most vocal sport about this, and they have drawn a lot of criticism and a lot of praise on both sides of the aisle. I hate to say it in political terms, but
it's no surprise.
Yeah, it's no surprise, but it's not universally loved. That's for damn sure. So he asked this very simple question. As the NBA is about to resume this weekend, what's next for them? Jay?
What's next in terms of on the court or off the court or both? How do you want to play it? Both? Well, I mean, on the court, I think there will be, I think the pregame press conferences in the lead up, I think post-game press conferences afterwards are going to resemble the ones you saw right when they got to the bubble and were starting to ramp up. You're going to see the guys talk maybe to a certain extent. I don't think they're going to say a lot of what went on in the meetings. I don't think they're really going to air whatever laundry was.
That'll get reported, though, I think, over time. There's enough people who have heard it.
There will be reports from sources, like The Athletic always does, or ESPN, where they'll report something that they heard from a source. But I don't think any of the players or the coaches are going to volunteer too much. I think they're going to focus on the message of why they did it and what they want out of it. And how they're, what they're going to do once they get out of this, since they are on the back end of this bubble experiment. On the court, I don't know that you're going to see anything different than what you've seen. Once these guys, I mean, these are professional basketball players, their ability to, once they step onto that hardwood, as they clear the mechanism. All the outside distractions go away for the 48 minutes that they spend in between those lines and on that hardwood, because that's their job. That's what they do. But it's also the sport they love to play. So they are all, in terms of the basketball itself, one of the things that's been a constant theme is, for the most part, they've enjoyed the basketball. It's everything else when they're not playing basketball about this situation, the bubble and everything else, that's weighed on them or frustrated them or whatever. So I think on the court, I think you're going to see the basketball that we've enjoyed talking about on our last show. I think that will continue. But I do think the comments that are going to be made in press conferences and interviews afterwards are going to be a little heavier on Jacob Blake, on George Floyd, on social justice, on reform, on police brutality. I think you're going to see those talking points that we heard a lot about in press conferences when we were coming into the bubble. I think they're going to ramp back up now. And it's not surprising. I mean, when you consider, the thing that has stuck with me, once this is kind of all started going down, and I think this will continue, is Doc Rivers' press conference in the wake of the Clippers' last game. And there are a couple of talking points that he said that really stuck with me. If you get a chance, it's a little over 2 minutes long. He gets emotional, but it is powerful, powerful stuff. And it really gets to the core of what this thing is all about for these players and coaches. And when he leads off with, quote, "We keep loving this country, but it doesn't love us back." I mean, how does that not hit you right in the face? He's like, we got to do better. We got to demand better. Training has to change in the police force. Police unions have to be taken down. And he talks about how his dad was a cop, how he believes in good cops because he's known good cops. And that, the whole thing is they don't want to defund the police. At the end of the day, what they want from the police is just to get them, and this is a quote, just get them to protect us like they do everyone else. And I think those themes are going to continue to persist, and you're going to hear players and coaches kind of echoing that and what they'd like to do, what they feel is necessary to do going forward to really get substantial change. And a lot of it, go back and read the entire transcript of George Hill's, letter to the media, as it was, when the Bucks made the decision to boycott the game. Go read the full transcript of what he said. because that's also going to be taken from again and again, because he basically covered everything from soup to nuts about the players' reaction to all of this. I mean, there was time after what happened with George Floyd and the bubble started up for things to, for lack of a better phrase, settle somewhat. I don't think they hoped and prayed, but they didn't expect something like this to happen while they were in the bubble, and especially right smack in the middle of the playoffs. So if there was ever any concern like Kyrie had about the message getting lost while they were down there, well, cops shooting Jacob Blake 7 times in the back basically made sure that's not going to happen from now till the end of the bubble.
Before I get to Anthony's point, you can't predict that anything is not going to happen or is going to happen. This doesn't go away. There's still, the police training doesn't happen overnight. In fact, If you're a part of the NYPD, and God forbid, my late father-in-law was part of the NYPD, you have a very, very, very staunch rep that basically takes none of this training seriously and defends the cops, probably to the detriment of any African-American man.
Yeah.
It's kind of sickening, and honestly, I almost expect something like this to happen. I don't not think it's going to happen. I expect stuff like this to happen, and that's sad. And I think you're not kidding yourself if you don't think it's going to happen again.
No, you're right, Rabbi. And maybe I'm trying to get myself on the side of optimism, because so much of 2020 has yanked optimism away from all of us as a collective society.
Have you met me? Optimism is always gone with me.
Well, that's you. I'm trying to find optimism where I can because of what we've all been going through this year. But Rabbi, the comment you made about NYPD is spot on. And Anthony, I'm just going to throw this out there and then you can take it. There is a mantra. There's a guy I know. I've known him since we were 12. He wore the badge for 25 years. He is very much the blue line, Blue Lives Matter. And there's a mantra that I don't know if I heard or read it somewhere else, but I've definitely heard it and seen it in posts that he puts up. We're on opposite spectrums politically and the way we look at society. So the only thing he and I talk about is sports, because we've always had that. But there's a phrase. It's called better to be judged by 12 than carried by 6, which in plain English means better to risk being put in prison than risk being put in the ground. And this has been a mantra, and I can't 100% say it's cops nationwide, but it's very much an NYPD thing, and it has been handed down generation after generation after generation, and it is ingrained. It is that whole blue wall of silence, what you were talking about, Rabbi, and until that changes, the change that these guys are looking for, it's going to be an uphill battle, because this is far too ingrained in New York and maybe even nationwide.
Yeah, I mean, you know what? You hit it right on the nail, Jay. On the court, I don't expect much to change, because it's going to be the basketball we all expect, and the competition's going to be there. But I had a few friends who are in the NYPD right now. My brother went to the police academy, and there is this stigma of us against them culture that does exist within the ranks. And even there was one of my friends told me about a colleague of his that wanted to report some wrongdoing with his partner and was ostracized for it. So it was like, it's not that you don't have good cops not speaking out. They're punished for doing just that. And then there was a thing with the police unions. I mean, we're not seeing one that head of the police union for New York supporting Donald J. Trump right there. And it's like, and it kind of is like, well, you're not, how tone deaf can you be to not realize that you're kind of inflaming the whole anti-police sentiment when you're putting support behind someone who is known to be kind of stoking the flames of racism and politicizing a whole lot.
Let me stop you right there for one quick second. He also cares about the interests of his base and his base of the base. And I think Donald Trump does more for that. I don't think it's the NYPD stoking the flames of racism.
No, not the NYPD.
I'm talking about Trump, Rabbi.
I think Trump has stoked the flames of racism before, but one thing that Trump has done, and I know Joe Biden has said he's not going to defund the police, but one of Trump's platforms is law and order in America, and I think that's more one of the reasons why.
That's an old conservative Republican.
It is an old Republican conservative
peer into the white conservative base.
Absolutely, it does. Absolutely, it does. It's been done for generations, and that's kind of one of the reasons.
I'm talking about Trump stoking the flames of racism, not the NYPD, but putting the support behind Trump and knowing all that. I mean, Trump is a guy who literally is telling suburban America that he is going to keep Black people out of the suburbs to keep them safe, and you're putting your support behind this person, knowing what's going on in this country with police officers and what's been done towards Black Americans. I mean, it leaves you very uncomfortable. And I remember telling you when we had our show about George Floyd, when the protest was going on right here by the Barclays Center, and I talked about, I didn't feel uncomfortable being around the protesters. I felt more uneasy and uncomfortable seeing so many police officers walking around patrolling the neighborhood, because I'm a guy who will go out early in the morning, go for a run and go for walks and kind of mind my business. You know, who's to say I go out and I'm harassed or I'm profiled because I quote unquote fit a description. And that's one of the things that for the not just NBA, but sports in general, that's the uphill climb, because you're seeing police unions support their own through thick and thin, no matter what. Even when they know the police officers are in the wrong, they're still supporting them, still behind them. And then you're seeing this thing about administrative leave rather than, anybody else being charged. And that's that's where the change need to be made, because it's like, well, it's not the action as much as the inaction after the fact. Is that why are they getting away with this and getting administrative leave of absence, or even worse, getting fired, and then, and we've seen in some cases down the line, getting their jobs back because of the very unions that fought for them in the first place. And that's where the uncomfortable feeling lies. And George Hill even brought up there was a law in California about police reform, but you know what, the unions have gotten to it, and even Bill Plaschke talked about it on ESPN around the horn, that unions has gotten to it, that politicians got to it, and it has been watered down so much from its original proposal that it's almost like, well, if it passes, is it going to actually change anything? And they were talking, and obviously here in New York, the crime rate has gone up considerably. Is it a coincidence that this happened to be around the same time that talks of defunding the police came about? I don't know. I don't have the proof to tie the two together. But like I said, like on the court, we're going to see sports. You're going to see the Lakers, the Clippers, and the Bucks, and these teams competing, because at the end of the day, that is their job. That's their occupation. That's their livelihood. But they're human beings. Like I watched the video of George Floyd and what it was going, and then it's with Breonna Taylor, and And I'm like, well, you shouldn't even have to be black to be upset. You should be, if it's human decency,
Yeah.
you should be upset. Because at the end of the day, it's like, I've seen white criminals be taken in unscathed. I mean, did we not just see the same police department that shot Jacob Blake 7 times his back, literally let an underage 17-year-old walk by them, even give him a bottle of water and thanking him instead of checking for his ID if he was 18 and old enough to actually carry a weapon, who wasn't even from Wisconsin, he was from Illinois, and we find out that his mother drove him into Kenosha, Wisconsin, and that's another argument in itself. And as a result of the cops' reaction, he murders 2 people who were protesting and injures 2 more people. And it's the same, and you saw, and it's like Kenosha, Wisconsin, not only just turned into another shooting of an unarmed black man, it's turned into, it's shown the very hypocrisy that has been pointed out for so long. Like why is it that a black man is being shot for a hypothetical weapon he may or may not have, whereas Dylan Roof kills 9 people in a church and is taken to Burger King right after. That's what the uphill climb is, because it's not just the racial divide as far as how African Americans are treated as far as punishment. It's literally how the cops has even taken to how they take someone of color who may be a suspect as far as someone who is white, and that's what the uphill climb is going to be, because it's like this has been deep seated for generations. This has just happened yesterday or last week. It didn't happen at the beginning of 2020. This has been going on for a very long time, and this is the kind of systematic racism that is going to really take a long time to dig away at, because it starts with, it starts with getting legislation passed. Maybe reforming police training. Why is it that it takes longer hours to be a hairdresser than a police officer in some states? It's still beyond me. Maybe those veterans have been around 10, 15 years who got into it for the wrong reasons need to be reminded of why they got into being a police officer in the first place. Because like I said, there's got to be something done as far as just the basis of being a police officer. It's protect and serve, but are you really living up to that very oath if you're not actually like who's training these officers to not realize that if your last resort is using a firearm, is to not especially someone who's unarmed, but you don't have to resort to deadly force. You shoot him at an arm or leg or just anything. But
his back is to you. Why do you feel the need to shoot him at all?
Why do you feel the need to grab him? And
there's 3 of you. Look at that video. There's 3 cops coming up behind him. Even if it's just 2 of them, don't tell me with his back is turned, you can't jump him and face him down on that seat, get his arms behind him and handcuff him and just sit him on the floor while you wait for backup or whatever.
Guys, we're kind of getting off topic a little bit. I want to kind of focus it back on everything else. I'm going to answer this question, then we're going to move on to question number 3, which I think is a big one in itself. Number 1, I do think you'll see a little bit of a change on court, because there's going to be a lot of raw emotion in it, but there's going to be a lot of players who, I won't say are checked out, but are going to look at the game differently. I think when you come after an incident like this, you see the world and you see the court a little bit differently. Yeah, of course you're going to get the same type of action, but no, you're going to see pre-game and post-game, no mention of anything during the game, which is perfectly fine. If you listen to the Chris Paul interview after the Clippers shellacked the Mavericks on Tuesday, you'll see what was going on there. If you listen to LeBron James Monday night after the Lakers beat the Portland Trail Blazers on 8/24, by the way, a day where you're celebrating Kobe Bryant, you'll realize that this is going to affect a little bit of on-the-court product. I don't think it's going to be a bad product or anything like that, but I think we'll understand what's going on out there. And then what's next? I have no idea. I really have no idea. And I don't want to be like vague when I say that, but I think we're in 2020. It is a tumultuous time for everybody. I expect some people possibly to leave the bubble. I expect some people to not quit on their season like a certain Boston Bruins goalie did.
Goaltender.
Yeah, but I do expect some players to just not have their hearts into it. And honestly, that's okay. Because I think what we've learned over these last 2 days is there's more to the world than sports. Is sports a distraction, especially for me, somebody who is as uncomfortable as anybody talking about politics, and I was the first one to actually mention it on this show this week. Yes, it is uncomfortable. It's a damn distraction to me. I work in the industry. I understand completely what it means to me. But I do think sports has been put in its rightful place over the last 2 days. It's made headlines, but we now focus on what's going on. And I think we're going to look a little bit differently at what's going on in the world, even when we watch a sports game over the next few weeks, months, and hopefully years. Speaking of that, the attention span of any viewer these days is kind of lacking, except if you're the attention span of somebody who's on the right. So, and the far right for that matter. So, I ask to you guys, and we'll start with Anthony, what will the ramifications be for the NBA specifically in the long run because of all of this?
Because of all this, you know what? If I think that the ratings, I mean, nowadays people stream and watch things on like various forms anyways. I think ratings somewhat are kind of overrated these days. Will it take us somewhat of a hit? Yeah, I think so. But, you know, and that's from, you know, the conservatives and the far right individuals who may not like the quote unquote politics mixed in with sports. But you know what? For the generation that we are in and the younger generation, if anything, it's gonna make these. If anything, it's gonna harken back to the days where you did have Bill Russell and Arthur Ashe and some of these prominent black athletes, not just performing but using their platform. And the thing about today's athletes is that they realize that they have, you know, that they have the platform, not just when they take the court, is social media. You know, they have millions of followers. They have endorsement deals. I mean, I'm wearing a Nike shirt, obviously. I was exercising and working out earlier, but one of the most powerful advertisements we've seen in the last few weeks were from Nike. You know, they can't stop us, and you know the unity and the diversity that was shown in that advertisement. But for the NBA in the long run, the NBA, you know what, it's going to be, I think they're going to be just fine. You know what, they're not going to be some league that, because Trump's base doesn't like basketball players protesting and whatnot, that it's going to disappear overnight and then it's going to go into bankruptcy. And it's like, you know what, at the end of the day, the NBA, there's already a contingency of fans. You just go in the comment sections of any social media page, any Instagram or Facebook, and you see them fans or trolls or whatever the case is, kind of making it known that they don't hate these guys because of the team they play on, the fact that they done something to their favorite teams. They hate them because they are successful black men who are making millions of dollars in a sport that is revenue in the billions. I mean, if there's anything that made me laugh was because, you know, far right, members of far right point out NBA's, you know, deal with China, and then I have to tell them, have you looked on the tag of a "Make America Great Again" hat and see where it's come from? But as far as the long run, you know what? They have been. It's not the fact that it's that the leadership with the players, like LeBron James, like a Chris Paul was the Players Association president, or Giannis Antetokounmpo, or even guys like Patrick Beverley. I've given Patrick Beverley a lot of grief for his play on the court, but he is definitely a locker room leader in the Los Angeles Clippers. He was one of the other guys who were prominent about stopping the season altogether, along with the LeBron James and the Lakers. But also Adam Silver. You know what? When he did, he set the tone when the whole Donald Sterling situation came out, and he set the tone, and he basically picked up the torch, and he basically carried the ball that David Stern handed off to him, and it's taken the lead to not just a different level as far as popularity, as far as acceptance, as far as just being able to live the dream if you work hard enough. It's the fact that, you know what, none of the major sports have done a better job of playing sports and bringing attention and a light to social matters than the National Basketball Association. I think back to the Miami Heat and wearing the hoodies to honor Trayvon Martin. I think of Carmelo Anthony in his hometown, adopted hometown of Baltimore at the, and dealing with that issue when the protests was going out back then. I think of the New York Knicks being angry at their owner for not speaking out sooner after what happened to George Floyd. No coincidence that the Knicks immediately let out a statement yesterday in support of the players protesting.
Yeah, so did all the other 8 teams who were not part of the bubble, I believe.
Yeah,
so
it was definitely that, and to see on my social media page, and I followed the Toronto Blue Jays, and and they released a statement in conjunction with the Boston Red Sox and postponing their game, and to see some of the comments of Blue Jays fans talking about, which is totally different, maybe because it's Canada, and I talked about my trip to Toronto and seeing how diverse the city was, how they were proud of the team, and I see with the Mets fans tonight, we're proud of our team. We're proud of being New Yorkers, as Jay mentioned it. That was a New York moment. But the NBA set the tone for all this. The NBA set the tone for postponing the season because of COVID. Remember, it started with Adam Silver's decision, and it trickled down the same day we saw with the boycott trickling down to the other sports. So it's like the NBA has taken the ball and taken the lead as far as being proactive and not reactive. And we bashed the National Football League for being that sometimes.
Yeah.
We did it to the NHL just 24 hours ago for playing games when people felt like they should have postponed.
And we'll get to the NHL.
The NBA, I think it's in, and I said the NBA, you know what, in the long run, if they lose some fans that are on the far right, you know what, it is what it is.
Anthony,
at the end of the day, you'll probably do better off without those fans. Probably. Because they probably weren't fans in the first place. If they were fans and tuned in, it was definitely for the wrong reasons.
Anthony,
so you definitely do better off.
Okay, before I get to you, Jay, let me say one thing. First of all, bots. Many, 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 many bots. And only on one side of the aisle, my friends. That's number one. Number two, and this is a very important topic. You said the NBA is in the forefront of everything. How come from people like Bill Rhoden yesterday, who was saying everybody should walk out, to Mark Spears, to everybody was kind of criticizing the NBA. It's like, that's all you did? That's all you're going to do? And that kind of upsets me a little bit, because you made all this, you spent all this money to go into the bubble. You've done as much as you can possibly do without talking to law enforcement, and that obviously will be one of our topics, but they put in a lot of motion to what's been going on. The league has donated money to a lot of different funds, and I feel like the NBA, when the boycott happened, was a little discredited by saying what they've done going into the bubble is not enough, and this is a television stunt, and people should leave. So, as much as the NBA has done enough, they've kind of said, "Oh, you didn't do that much."
Yeah, well, at the same time, those same people that are complaining and criticizing the NBA are also the same people that tuned in because they wanted to be "quote unquote" distracted. You wasn't listening to the players when they were speaking their minds and making their feelings known about what's going on. So the next best thing was, you know what? You don't want to hear us. You're not going to see us for a couple of days. Stew on that. And somebody, mentioned, well, we went 3.5 months without sports because of COVID, and I had to remind them that I said you bitched and complained about not having sports during the 3.5 months too. So what's 2 days going to kill you? But you know what? At the end of the day, and people will criticize, the league going back to playing. So what's the point? You want to know what it is? You have the very platform you use to boycott. Why would you give that away by quitting altogether when you realize that how many people just saw Doc Rivers' emotional speech after the game if he had said that on an IG Live rather than after a game, after millions of people have watched a Clippers Mavericks game, and even it resonated to Dominic Smith of the Mets, if baseball wasn't going on, with Dominic Smith, statement of frustration because he feels like people still don't care, would it hit home a lot harder if baseball was not going on right now? So you gotta look at it like this: is that the platform isn't perfect as far as making everyone satisfied about the action, but people, and as Stephen A. Smith talked about, what's next? My answer to that is, let's see what Plan A plan out. Let's see the fruitation of Plan A first before we can move to Plan B, C, D, E, F, G. You can't talk about the other side of the bridge until you actually get there. And that's what frustrated me with Stephen A. I think that's why he blocked me on social media too. But
again,
it's that well, he never unblocked.
It's ongoing, Rabbi. It's in perpetuity.
But it's just the fact that you can't talk about, well, we need a plan. I'm quite sure people who protested on the civil rights movement did not think about what do we do after we sit in at a restaurant. No, they thought about, we're going to do this because we need to bring attention to this. When we get to that bridge, we'll get there. Like, hey, look, we crossed the bridges plenty of times driving or whatnot. We don't think about the destination before we get to the bridge. We're thinking about it once we're crossing the bridge. And that's my, I know it's a crazy analogy. And
no, it makes perfect sense, Anthony.
But you know what? That would be my answer to Stephen A. Smiths of the world. And I respect Stephen A. because, he brings a lot of good points to, but when he brings out, we need a plan. What's next? Let's get through the first step first off. Then we can get to step 2. This is South Park with the nose when it's step 1, still on the wheel, step 2, step 3, profit. That's not how it works. But it's like, let's get to the first step. Let's get through step 1. Then we'll worry about step 2.
Yeah, I mean, Anthony, a couple of things that, points that you made that really kind of hit home with me in terms of, how the NBA is going to be in the long run. And Rabbi, I'm going to kind of play off that because I kind of agree with Anthony. I think the NBA is going to be just fine. I think for the longest time now, they've been the league best positioned to weather any kind of storm, whether it's financial, societal, cultural, medical in this case, solely because of the fact that, and I'll talk about this again later in the comparison between the NBA and the NHL, everybody's on the same page. From the 15th guy on the bench of the worst team in the league to LeBron to Adam Silver and everybody in between.
Hold on a second. One of the complaints last night of that player meeting was that the Bucks unilaterally decided this before everyone else decided this. So they're not all on the same game.
But look, that was done, like I said, and that's related to what I was talking about at the top of the show, Rabbi, in terms of they visceral, raw, emotional reaction? Was it well thought out? Was it a concerted, let's get everybody together? No. Did they do something to strike out on their own that other people were like, oh, and the rest of the world, NBA, once they had a chance to take a second and go, yeah, okay, maybe not the way anyone else or the rest of us would have done it, but it's the right thing. So even though it may have caught us off guard, it's the right thing. We're going to follow them because it's the right thing. But what I'm talking about in terms of the NBA, that's what I'm saying. The NBA is going to be fine. This is a league, guys, that survived the finals airing on tape delay and the drug culture of the 70s. Nobody thought they would ever survive that. Okay? I mean, and you talked about Donald Sterling, Anthony, and to me, that was a turning point. Yes, it was a watershed moment for Adam Silver to put his stamp on the league and, separate him, to get himself out of the shadow of David Stern, who was his mentor and who he served under for decades. But it also was a turning point for Silver basically telling the league, top to bottom, players, owners, and everybody in between, what type of culture he wanted the league to have. And the Donald Sterlings of the NBA were not going to be part of it. And he was adamant about cleaning house and like, no, this is not going to continue. This is not what I want this league to stand for. And to me, that's where it started. And it has only risen and grown from there. And that's also why I think the NBA is going to be fine. But I mean, the thing, Anthony, that you brought up about, the far right and their anger and over millionaire black men making money playing basketball and and recognizing that they don't have to shut up and dribble because they have a platform. They have the power to facilitate the changes they want to see in society because when they speak, people listen and people want them to speak. And as far as the base that does the far right that doesn't like him, you're right, Anthony. The NBA doesn't care because that's not their base. Their base is, well, in some ways, some of it is maybe the liberal celebrities of LA and New York, maybe. But the base of it is the working class people of the cities in which they play. Is that working class base predominantly African American minority? Yes. But still, that's their base. So why should they not be spokesmen for that base, which is their base? Why not? They have the platform, they have the power, and I think over the years, they are recognizing that if they come together, they are strong. They are one hell of a strong group when they're the biggest stars are all saying the same thing and talking about the things that they want to do and the legacies that they want to leave behind for the generation that is following them. I mean, it's a different world than when they were kids and were looking up to NBA stars. Now they're the NBA stars and they have their own kids, their parents. Whereas growing up, they may not have had a two-parent home, but they are one of two parents in a home because that's how they're raising their kids. It's a different thing for them. And I think as the NBA has grown, as the players have grown and evolved over the course of the last few decades, yeah, Rabbi, the NBA is going to be just fine, and it may just be, and you know what? And down the road, who knows what these guys might be able to accomplish both on and off the court to make the league and the society better.
We'll go on the court. We'll go off the court in a very quick second. Yeah, of course the league is going to be just fine. I think the question is going to be more of what's the hit going to be from the bots, from the people on the right. I wouldn't even say the far right. I think the men in charge just kind of wanted to get all Republicans to be against the political organization, as Trump called them today, known as the National Basketball Association. But
he failed.
I mean, and the one thing he hasn't failed yet because we haven't seen anything yet past it, but I'm sure he will.
I'm talking about the failure in terms of the fact that the people that he's stirred up against the NBA are a dwindling. They're not the majority anymore, considering the amount of Republicans or people who are Republicans that identify that way, that he's pissed them off. So
he's pissed some people off, but again, as we mentioned before, he's pissed some people off, but I don't think it's, oh my God, there's only 1 million people out of 100 million people who follow him. It's a lot more. It's a lot more. You're not. No, I know he doesn't care, but I also know one fact.
The NBA doesn't care.
I know the NBA doesn't care, but it's a fact that. But they don't watch anyway. If they say I haven't stopped, they don't watch. So, but hold on. But I want to take you back to 1991 and something that I learned today for the very first time. Craig Hodges, who is a basketball player from back in the day.
Milwaukee Bucks.
Who actually asked Michael Jordan and Magic Johnson to boycott Game 1 of the 1991 NBA Finals to stand in solidarity against racism.
I know this story.
Magic said that's too extreme, bad, and Hodges' response is, what's happening to our people in this country is extreme. We were kind of in a different. I actually said this question today while walking with my wife. Very simply, if you thought that the plight of the African American man 28 years ago was better than it was in 2020, you would say I'm insane. But honestly, that's what I'm thinking right now. Maybe not in LA, but in everywhere else. I think it's harder to be an African American now than it has been almost ever before, at least in my lifetime. And that's something that's
in my lifetime, I have lived to see what happened to Rodney King.
And that's why I mentioned 92 immediately. Yeah.
I have lived to see what happened to Amadou Diallo, who was shot multiple times, unarmed.
41 times.
41 times. It's not the fact that this is worse. It's the fact that we're not seeing it because of technology, because we have social media, because we have smartphones. It's not the fact that racism wasn't as bad. It was always bad. It was always there.
It's never been this divisive. We're
recording it, and we're now sharing it with the world, and we're now taking pictures. We have our iPhones. It's almost like, it's not the fact that it didn't happen 28 years ago as much as it's now being broadcast before a live studio audience in 2020, because we now see that. You know, how many, like yesterday, I watched a viral video of they call us Black Lives Matter protesters harassing people who were eating outside. Obviously, it's outdoor dining. The problem was they were Black Lives Matter protesters, but they were majority white people. And it was like, it made me a little uncomfortable, because it was like, they're protesting for Black Lives Matter, but they're doing it in a way that is coming off as menacing, but also Black people are getting tied to this kind of behavior. And that made me a little uncomfortable, because it's like, no, this is not how you go about doing it. And this is certainly, this is definitely, this is not the way. Like like I said, when the protest was going on here, there were people spray painting Black Lives Matter on it, but it's like, they weren't African American, but African Americans are the ones that's going to get pinned. If you turn to a Fox News primetime show, they'll immediately labeling people who are protesting peacefully as thugs and looters and destroying our property. And then we find out that it's these outside groups that are coming into these communities and are doing that. And basically, the protesters are the ones getting nailed and getting pinned for it. You know, that's what it was like. And I was happy that, you know what, it was good that people recorded things like that. It was recording people spray painting Black Lives Matter or BLM on these buildings and smashing windows, because it was like, the first thing they would think back, and you saw with the Rodney King, riots and the protesting, back in 1992, even though the Watts riots, was that majority of the images we saw was of African Americans.
Yeah.
So obviously that perception was there, and the perception was being, and you see a lot of, you see conservative, a lot like conservative network and Trump base playing to that.
Yeah.
So when I saw that clip yesterday, it left me really uncomfortable, because it was like, as much as I'm happy that people of all colors are now starting to acknowledge this problem, this is not how you go about doing
No.
it. You don't harass and menace people into agreeing with you.
No.
When they're just going about their minding their business. And that was very unfortunate, because at the end of the day, like I said, the message is getting lost in the action in that case.
Yeah. Rabbi, I want to, before we move on to the next question of yours, and I think this will kind of, segue us into it. You talk about Hodges in that conversation with Michael and Magic. To me, that right there, that's indicative of, I don't want to say that racism was, being black in America, or even being a black athlete in America, was in a better position in the early 90s. I agree with Anthony that it's always the racism and the uncomfortableness and of not wanting to speak out has always been there. It was just less obvious and less at the forefront for two reasons. One, as Anthony put it, we didn't have cell phones with cameras. We did not have social media. And back then, NBA players back then were more inclined to go along to get along, because they were just starting. The NBA had just come out of, was still in the middle of the Magic and Larry era that saved the NBA. And Michael was, entrenching himself.
The link. He was the link.
Yes. And the thing is that they were starting to get recognized as cross the board, superstars, across all colors and creeds and whatever. And they were getting the endorsement dollars and the big dollars for the first time, and they did not want to rock that boat. So that's where it came from. It was always there, but because there was not as bright a light shown on it as we are seeing now, is why it may not have seemed that way. But as somebody who, I'm older than you guys, let me ask you, and the analogy I'll make, World War II was horrific. War of anything is horrific. But considering what the people at home really only saw were heroics on the newsreels before the movie started, they had no concept of just how awful war is. Fast forward to the late 60s and early 70s, when network television is quite literally bringing the blood, guts, and gore of the Vietnam War into people's living rooms as they were sitting down to dinner. War has always been that bad. The American people just didn't have it thrown in their faces. What we're seeing now is the same thing. The racism in this country that we may have thought had, dissipated a little bit in the 90s, no, it was still there. And it was probably as bad as it is now, though now is probably a lot worse for a whole host of reasons. But now it's getting thrown in America's faces daily.
It is.
That is the difference.
It absolutely is. And I think, again, more of where we are as a society in being divisive. And I think I said that right.
Yes, and that is definitely making it.
Where we are is the reason why, and is the reason why I think that I wouldn't say plight, but the position is kind of more dangerous. And also, I think what the NBA is doing is tremendously bold, what the players are doing, because ratings-wise, the only team that's really seen any real increase in ratings this year are the Lakers. And that's one of the reasons why going out on a limb here is even being more, I wouldn't say heroic, but even more of a risk than it was in the post-Magic and Bird era. Okay, I'm going to ask one portion of question number 4, because we've kind of answered a lot of questions of question number 4 tonight in our answers. And I'm going to ask you a very simple question. After all of this in sports, will there be any social change at all that comes of it?
I'll take the lead on this one, Anthony. And Rabbi, I think you can kind of throw out question 5 because I kind of think you can combine the two here. So,
okay.
You want to do it or do you want me to? So go ahead.
No, you do both. Do both.
So, I mean, to me, it ties into what was going to be the rabbi's 5th question of the 6 is what is the responsibility of the owners and executives in all of this? And I think if there's going to be any dramatic societal change here, and, sources say that, in the meeting with the teams, LeBron said he wanted more action from the owners on racial justice matters, and the Bucks were looking for Wisconsin state legislature to convene and pass stricter safety protocols for police to follow. I think it all kind of dovetails together. The players know what they want. They have been more than clear about the reforms that they are looking to see as it relates to systemic racism, police brutality, social injustice, all of that. What needs to happen for any of that to actually become societal change, and I ranted to you about this when we were talking earlier in the day, Rabbi, it is going to land on the owners of these teams. In the NBA specifically, because that's where the largest and loudest voices from the players is coming, but across the sports spectrum, because what's the predominant demographic of the owners? It's a phrase you guys have heard me use time and time again, rich old white men. And these guys have to decide, and where do they normally lean? Towards the Republican side, which is at odds basically with what these players want. And it's a question where these owners have to decide, whose side are you really on? What side of history do you want to be on? And do you want to be on the wrong side of it? And they have to look at it and go, you know what? These guys that I keep contributing to their campaign, these other old white men that I keep putting into the Senate, Mitch McConnell, Lindsey Graham, these guys, isn't it high time that I backed my players, because what they're asking for is for a larger portion of society than the guys that I'm looking to put in office? Because have those guys really done anything? And Anthony, you asked this question, has Mitch McConnell ever done anything for the people? And I told you no. But how many of the guys that these owners back and help get elected that do nothing? It has to be on both sides. The minority players, which is the predominance of the NBA, and the majority white owners, they all have to decide to come together and look at that. This is not partisan. This is human. And enough is a freaking enough. And and they need to side with the players on this, because they're the ones who can go to a senator and go, you want me to keep getting you elected? You want me to keep contributing to your campaign? Do you want me to keep getting my fellow owners and my friends to contribute to campaigns to keep you getting elected to the Senate every 6 years? Well, then forget the other special interest groups. Screw the NRA. Screw the others. This is what you're going to focus on, because this needs to get done, not just for the black players in the NBA, but for the entire society, because it's high time that we come together and make what it says in the Constitution be true for all. And it will only happen if the players keep pushing it at the grassroots level, but the owners chime in at the rarefied air level. It needs to be done together. And if they don't do it together, it's not going to happen, no matter how long and loud the players protest.
You know what? I'll bring out what Le'Veon Bell tweeted earlier. He said, we've protected the shield. Now it's time for the shield to protect us. And that was spot on, because what we talked about as far as ownership, especially in the National Football League, it's 4 years ago. By the way, the Bucks protest did land on the 4-year anniversary of Colin Kaepernick's protest.
That's right.
Which it definitely should be brought to attention. But to hear Roger Goodell say we should listen to Colin Kaepernick, it's kind of gives you an eye roll, because at the end of the day, that falls on, not just the owners, but some of his peers, because I feel like had more of his peers supporting him. You couldn't have just blackballed the one guy.
White peers, Anthony.
Yeah, and some of his white peers should have supported him. But then you think about this with Jerry Jones is come up with this anthem policy. But it's like, let's be honest, not this change between Jerry Jones between 2016 to 2020. It's just he's phrasing it differently. But let's be honest, we know where he stands, and the kind of the semi threat he holds over the Cowboys organization. You know, I'm interested to see, okay, what does Dak Prescott think in the back of his mind? You know, you've been a company man for all this time, and you even spoke out against Colin Kaepernick. Well, now here it is 4 years later, you're watching everyone else get a big paycheck except you. How is that going to play into what you're thinking about as far as Jerry Jones, you know, anthem, you know, view is at this point? But yeah, it is interesting that the owners should do more. I'm reading online. I have it up on Sporting News. That Tillman Fertitta, you know, has been part of Houston Rockets ownership, has been a major donor to the Trump campaign. And
one of probably the biggest of anybody in that list.
Yeah, the biggest actually. And one of the family, one of the ownership members of the ownership of Orlando Magic is Betsy DeVos. You know, since who's a Secretary of Education, has been a major controversial figure in her own right for a lot of reasons. And you think about like these NFL owners that have donated to the Trump campaign and yeah, that shit calm. You know, the Jacksonville Jaguars and suddenly having buyer's remorse a year later, like you didn't know the person that he was contributing to. You know, the Daniel Snyder's. But you know, what kills me is that, yeah, the players obviously making up the voices heard is one thing, but an attorney general or even a politician, who are they going to answer the phone to a lot quicker? Are they going to answer the phone for Saquon Barkley, or are they going to answer the phone for John Mara, who is the owner of the principal owner of the New York Giants? Whose phone call is going to get through a lot quicker? LeBron James or Jeannie Buss, the owner of the Los Angeles Lakers? Yeah, and I'm getting to that because when I heard Jared Kushner talking about he's going to reach out to LeBron James, not Adam Silver, not Jeannie Buss, and not Chris Paul, the Players Association, it kind of reminded me like, okay, now we know why you're kind of the most useless member of this administration, because clearly you missed the boat on this one.
Yeah, but, let's not give him any more airtime.
Yeah, but that's beside my point. The owners are the guys, or the people who are majority white, and yes, they are majority Republican for what it's worth, but they are the ones who, I know Rabbi's doing this.
There's a reason for this. Keep going.
Yeah. And the ownership, you know, it's majority white, but they're the ones who can make that phone call. You know, you're quick to cry and complain about getting a new stadium when you want it, getting funded for a new stadium, PSLs, you know, which you basically rob the heck out of season ticket holders. So you have no problem doing that. You have no problem getting requirements to get a stadium built. But now when the players who are basically the ones driving your sports franchise, the ones who are bringing in who the fans are actually going to see. They're not going to see. Nobody goes to the Knicks game to see James Dolan.
No.
Whatever. They go see the Knicks or whatever the Knicks against whatever team they're playing that night. Nobody. I've gone to many Ranger games. I can care less if James Dolan's in the building or not. But I do care if Henry Lundqvist is going to stop 40 shots that night.
Yep.
And the Rangers win at the end of the day.
Yep.
When I go to Madison Garden, Survivor, you and I are WWE big wrestling fans. Yeah. I'm going to watch the man Becky Lynch. I don't give a rat's ass if James Dolan is eating popcorn in session 305. What do I care? Or sitting ringside? But besides the point is the fact that these are the guys who have the power and the influence because they are the owners. They're the billionaires. They're the ones that drives some of these stadium deals. I mean, are we not seeing Sophie Stadium, this big, you know, multi-billion-dollar complex being debuted on Sunday Night Football in a few weeks against the Dallas Cowboys when the Rams take the field? Or how about the Las Vegas Raiders and, you know, and Mark Davis and the Davis family? You know, you mean to tell me they can't pick up a phone call and call and talk to an attorney general about possibly, what can we do as far as police being held more accountability, extending the olive branch as far as getting communities and the police force to see if they can get on the same page. Men tell me that it has to be all on the millionaire players that people always get flack to, but not the billionaire owners who will black out a game in a heartbeat when they don't sell out a stadium on TV. So you have to listen to the radio or watch it somewhere else. So it's like, okay, there's a difference between it's a different. We see it with the Toronto Raptors. Are we not seeing the president of the Raptors, countersuing a police officer who literally pushed him twice?
Yeah.
As he was trying to take the court to celebrate with his team
and
after
he
title. After
he pushed him even after people said he's the president of the Raptors.
Yeah. So obviously, a position of power has not stopped a black man from having a police officer treat him wrongly. That we've seen that with our own 2 hours just last week when the video footage came out. But when I talk about the responsibility of the owners, is that the players are the ones doing it, but the owners need to do more, because at the end of the day, like I said, Jerry Jones is good friends with the president, and for what that is, that's what it is. But then it's like, okay, never mind that. For us local officials in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, if Jerry Jones is on line 1, you're going to pick that call up. If Ezekiel Elliott's on line 1, you're going to have it go to voicemail. That's what I said. It's a big difference between a guy like Stephen Ross of the Miami Dolphins calling and someone else.
We're talking about Aloha?
Yeah, it's someone else in the Miami Dolphins calling. And that's why I said the owners are the ones who have these powerful connections. They're the ones that they should be put in a position by the players. So like, hey, wait a minute, we bring you all the money, but at the end of the day, what about us? Whose side are you on? Because we've seen the NFL kind of regret being on the wrong side of history now. 4 years later, we're seeing Major League Baseball protesting. Well, 3 years ago, we only had Bruce Maxfield, the one guy that took a knee. We're seeing the National Hockey League, a culture that is literally about national pride and playing hockey the right way. Even though they dropped the ball yesterday, let's be honest, they're speaking on social issues and they've had a hard time even making black players feel comfortable in that culture and in that environment. And we see an African-American rookie for the Rangers got to go through racial slurs on a live Q&A a few months back. Yeah. So, like I said,
and there have been racist members of the New York Rangers saying
yes, and we've seen that too. So like I said, it is like as far as socially, and I said this on the show, it is going to be a long, steep uphill climb. But at the end, but you know what? The more allies, the more powerful allies that see the cause, the more I think we'll get to where we need to be sooner than later. If not this generation. And Jay, you and I will proud uncles, and I don't know if I have kids one day for what it's worth. But you know what? I would like to see my niece and nephew grow up in a society where this skin color is not gonna make them somehow a threat at the end of the day.
Yes.
And that's the society I would like to see before I pass on at the end of the day. And this is what we should be working on. It may not happen this generation, but you know what? Let's plant the seeds for the next generation, the generation after that, the same way the previous generation planted the seed for this one and that generation. Well, it's like a tree. You're not going to take it down with one hack. You got to keep chopping away and chopping away and chopping away until that son of a bitch eventually fall.
Yeah.
And that's how I look at it. It's going to take a long time, but you know what? Just keep hacking away at this. The more we hack at it, the more it's going to come down.
Yeah, absolutely.
As John Lewis said, and the late great John Lewis, as he said, It's not going to happen today. It's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen next week, next month, or even next year. This is a lifetime struggle, and we need to keep at it. Our lifetime, the next lifetime, we just have to keep at it.
Yeah, we do. First of all, not necessarily. So the NFL owners are exactly what Jay says, a rich white man's club. And I think the NFL owners are kind of wiping the sweat off their brows because their sport is still not on the field yet.
Yep.
They don't have to deal with player protests. And honestly, the only thing I think they're getting pressured with at the moment, and I think NFL players should do more, but the only thing they're getting pressured at the moment is my team going to stand or kneel for the national anthem? Yeah, good. Yeah, so forget the NFL owners right now because they're the hardest to kind of control, especially because we have a certain hierarchy of the New York Jets that has a guy who might have engaged in some lewd activity while part of that organization, while part of Trump's cabinet, allegedly. So, and that's probably not the worst of the offenses that have happened, but
he hires the best people. What can I say? I mean,
yeah, he hires the best and greatest people. Okay, but the one good thing about the NBA is they have a different type of culture out there. For every, and we mentioned it before, Tillman Fertitta, who is probably the biggest Trump head on the entire board and definitely the most far-right person, you have a Mark Cuban. For every, God, I'm trying to remember which name I'm going to throw in the bus. For every Peter Holt from the San Antonio Spurs, who has made all of his money basically on business, you have, God, I am completely getting on, but you have a Jeannie Buss, who is very progressive. You have the Atlanta Hawks and the Philadelphia 76ers, who are owned by a bunch of different people. You have a very diverse group of owners out there, and you have Wesley Edens and Mark Glassry, which is the biggest thing right now because they're the Milwaukee Bucks owners, and they probably had something to do with getting the lieutenant governor on the phone almost immediately after everything happens. I actually put a lot of hope in what we see right now in basketball because a lot of the owners are reasonable people. You have Ann Walton Kroenke, who was married to Stan Kroenke. I believe they divorced, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if that's the case, but she's the more reasonable of the group. You have Steve Ballmer out there. You don't have a lot of people who are your normal, grouchy billionaire owners. You have Michael Jordan as an owner, for God's sakes. There are a ton of people that can put
conversations today.
Yeah. There's a ton of people who can put pressure on their local governments. There's a ton of people who can put pressure on their state governments, and I think they will. But the next question is going to be, will they listen? When it's not an election year, will they listen? Yeah. Well, again, as we have said, everything gets stuck in the mud when everything is going. So this isn't a far left versus far right thing. It's a reasonability thing that is going to bring all of this to a little bit of a intersection, so to speak. And also, getting back to the point, now we can't even pass police reform in New York because now all of a sudden the choking a suspect has now been kind of changed to you can't crush his larynx. So unfortunately, there are unfortunate side effects to what's been going on out there in police reform because, as you said, the unions have made sure that not a lot gets passed, and it hasn't gotten passed. All right.
Rabbi, before we get to the last question, which
I got it. I have it in my hand right here. I'll tell it to you in a second.
I mean, I think the first part of that question, I kind of want to take the lead on that because, I mean, I don't know that we need the back half of it because they're still going to go on. So I don't think we need to worry about that. I think we should confine it
to
of
course.
Part A, because I kind of want to segue that into how we talk about the difference in the difference in cultures between the NBA and the NHL.
One more thing about the Masai Ujiri situation, which should be more talked about because it just really kind of came back to the forefront because of that video that Anthony mentioned. Mm-hmm. It's sickening. It's really sickening, and it just shows that when an NBA player says, I could be the next victim, and even Vince Carter this morning said, I have to bring my ID and let people know who I am because I'm afraid people are going to confront me for being somebody in a neighborhood that's more affluent. It's just sad to see. It's sad to see all across the nation. It's just sad to see this all across the nation. And like I said, we're going to be at a divisive time, and I'm afraid it's going to continue at least until January 2021 or beyond, because we're getting to the point where this is going to be one of the most heated falls that we've ever seen in our entire lifetime.
But if there is a change at the top, January 2021 is really when the first steps of the long trek and the hard work that has to get put in, hopefully that is when it starts.
Yes, it represents hope.
Right, which is the supply right now everywhere. In sports, out of sports, it's in short supply everywhere.
It does. But unfortunately, as I mentioned before, we've nominated 2 old white men for this presidency. And that just shows, even though Kamala Harris got the vice presidential nomination, that just shows where we still are today.
We still have a long way to go.
A long, long way to go. Okay. Final question for the night, guys. It's been fun talking about this, but I'm exhausted. I think we're all exhausted. Jay, what role does sports have in the world now, in your opinion?
I have always felt that sports brings people together. It is a meritocracy, and it is where people from all shapes and sizes, all races, all creeds come together in a communal situation in love and in rooting for a particular sports team. We have seen it throughout history how in times of strife, it has been an excellent way to bring the country back together. And I think it's going to continue, but I think across the board, sports has to do better. And I'm not just talking about, the player, and it's, look, because there is a huge gap between the NBA up here and the NHL down here. To me, that's the way both of those leagues responded Wednesday night, to me, is a perfect example of how there's the bar that the NBA has set. Everybody needs to step up their game to kind of get up there. And as I said to you guys across text, I understood why the NHL didn't cancel any games Wednesday night. Honestly, it didn't surprise me, so now bear with me. The NBA was always going to be first up and out in front of things like this. As we talked about earlier, it's a combination of the culture, the relationship between the league office, as in Adam Silver, and the players, and the fact that the dominant player demographic is black males. The NHL is always going to be last for the same reasons. The culture is completely different, as is the relationship between the players in the league office, as in Gary Bettman, and the fact that the dominant player demographic is white males. This hits very close to home for the NBA, as evidenced by the raw, visceral reactions we all saw across their social media platforms. And even though, the boycotting of the games on Thursday may have been player-driven, the moment OKC and Houston joined the Bucks in boycotting, the NBA correctly read the room, and they put out a statement that the rest of the slate would get postponed. And while the NHL players may sympathize and want to stand with their NBA counterparts that Wednesday night, the reaction from them wasn't going to be the same. And all you have to do to understand that is comments made by Deputy Commissioner Bill Daley. Quote, I don't expect the league to initiate a game stoppage. Obviously, our players are free to express themselves in any manner they feel appropriate, end quote. The league would be supportive. That pretty much nails it as to why, NHL player Matt Dumas said the NHL is always, quote, last to the party on these topics. They should have devoted more than 27 seconds to acknowledging the events, and the statement should have been more than just the empty platitudes. The NHL would like to take this moment to wish Jacob Blake and his family well and call out to our fans and communities, stand up for social justice and the effort to end racism. No mention that Blake was a black man shot by a white police officer. No mention that his children were in the car when he was shot. And as Scott Burnside of The Athletic wrote, quote, the NHL might have been sending regards to a retiring fan or scout. So empty and hollow was this moment of reflection. You know, look, I did believe that if the NBA decided to postpone today's games, which they did, that the NHL would follow suit, which they did, postponing both Thursday and Friday games. You know, they do plan to restart on Saturday, but nothing has been officially decided. To be clear, all of that was player-driven, not league-driven, and was somewhat born out of more than 100 NHL players in the bubbles having talks with Evander Kane and Matt Dumba, both who are members of Hockey's Diversity Alliance, and according to The Athletic's Pierre LeBrun, and that organization has a mission to eradicate racism and intolerance in hockey, which, like the NBA in the 90s, Rabbi, it's under the radar, but it's coming to the surface more and more. But I mean, as San Jose's Anson Carter, who's a veteran, who's been in this league a long time, he rightly called the NHL out for how pathetically they handled the whole thing in a tweet that read, quote, actually, it's incredibly insulting as a black man in hockey, the lack of action and acknowledgement from the NHL, just straight up insulting. He went on to say, quote, it's great to write statements, it's great to send tweets, it's great to post stories and pictures on Instagram, but at the end of the day, it's going to be about real action and meaningful change, and unfortunately, that still isn't occurring. We need to do better. He was talking about the NHL specifically, but you could extrapolate that to the rest of the sports leagues in general. NBA has set the bar. If sports is going to enact meaningful change and be an agent of that change and push for it, the rest of the leagues need to raise their game to the NBA's level.
You know what? I've always said that, and one of the things I do miss because of this pandemic is that I've always said the one place you can find people of all races, backgrounds, upbringings,
They're looking at you.
where everyone get along was in an arena or a stadium.
Yep.
Root for one team because you have a common goal. And I think back to last summer. I took my mother to a Mets game. You know, we're sitting along the first baseline. It was the night they were playing the Cleveland Indians. J.D. Davis hit a walk-off single to win the game in extra innings. I just remember before that game, my mother and I joking around and we're taking pictures, and this white couple behind us, you know, just tap me on the shoulder and ask if they would they would take the picture for us, you know, take the picture of my mom and I. No, they didn't have no problem with it. We all have fun in our little section, our little section of Met fans that we were joking around with. We was laughing, joking about a scene from the show, you know, a show from CBS that was being filmed prior to the game. And it was just a fun night, but more importantly, getting on that 7 train and laughing and joking with Met fans who were from other places, all walks of life. And that's one of the things that I felt sports did. Sports brought people together. And I tell people all the time, if you don't like politics and sports, don't watch the Olympics, because the Olympics is literally a combination of sports and politics.
Well, somebody had said before today that the next thing that the United States should do if the Olympics go on in 2021 is boycott, because of the fact that the Olympians won't be proud to represent this.
You know what?
And
it would be the first time the United States have boycotted the Olympics. They boycotted Olympics
1980.
Yes, but they boycotted it because of someone else's stance, not because of their own.
Yeah. But it was just, and I tell people this all the time, that the Olympics is a combination of sports and politics, but it's also a form of unity, because you do see a competition, but it is the respect of the sport, the competition, and also your country, but more importantly, you as a fellow human being at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And the role that sports have in the world, and especially now, well, every day, you know what, it's an election year, and every day has been politicized, literally down to the steps we need to get through a pandemic. And you think about the role that sports have, sports it's not just a distraction. It's not, and that's I think that's the one thing. We may work our butts off. We all have jobs, and we go home, and yeah, it sucked that we went 3 months without seeing any live sports, and the fact that we did get a chance to talk about basketball tonight as originally planned, and we were going to talk about the NBA playoffs, but then at the same time, you realize at the end of the day, these athletes have families too. They are parents. They are brothers. They're brothers and sisters. By the way, shout out to the WNBA as well. I mean, we talk about the NBA, the WNBA, and Jay, you and I have been fans. We've gone to New York Liberty games in the past, from their Unity games. So nice. Well, they've raised awareness for the LGBTQ community, and and breast cancer awareness, and like I said, I'll think about the University of Texas, the Lady Vols, and the late great Pat Summitt, and wearing the special pink uniforms for certain games to bring awareness there. So it's like the WNBA deserves a lot of credit, especially like I said for Jacob Blake, and even today, every player that is still in that bubble from all teams came together and took a picture of solidarity and unity, and you seen players like Sue Bird speaking out, and Diana Taurasi and all these players, and that's what you want. More importantly, we're seeing the role that sports have. We're seeing that these athletes, and maybe, like I said, and I remember we've seen on the Last Dance documentary, Michael Jordan get criticized for not doing it as a player, but now embracing it more as an owner. They are embracing the roles they have as leaders. Mm-hmm. The fact that their voices actually resonate more to the average American than a politician right now in 2020 America. And the fact that they realize that, we have this platform. God rest his soul, we just celebrated Kobe Bryant. He won an Academy Award for a basketball short. And he said in his acceptance speech that he was happy to prove that athletes didn't have to just do more than just shut up and dribble.
Yes.
And I love the fact that this generation of athletes are embracing their roles. And Bill Russell acknowledged it and told them, continue to make good trouble.
Yep.
Because that was the fight that he was fighting when he boycotted an exhibition game because a restaurant wouldn't serve him and a few of his teammates because they were black. Or the fact that, even you think about Jackie Robinson and Pee Wee Reese, you go outside MCU Park and there's a statue of those two very players for a reason, because that was the one teammate that embraced Jackie Robinson, not just as a player, as a teammate, not as a black teammate. He embraced him as a human being. I think back to Doug Williams being asked, how long has he been a black quarterback, and going out there and lighting up the Denver Broncos for 35 unanswered points in a quarter, which is still, to this day, a Super Bowl record. And thinking to myself, you know what? If I ever I never played quarterback, of course, but whoever wanted to play quarterback, I hope one day they're not going to be asked, what's it like to be a black quarterback in the NFL? Or how about Lovie Smith and Tony Dungy, two African-American coaches against each other in the Super Bowl for the first time? Well, in the sports industry, how about Greg Gumbel, an African-American, calling a Super Bowl for the first time? It's things like that gives you optimism or hope that, you know what, we can't, as a country, we can do better. Why can't sports take the lead in showing America that we could be so much better than where we were 10 years ago, than where we are now, and where we can be 10 years from now, when we're all possibly gray and out of shape. I don't know, but
now we are. We're not before. That's for sure.
But that's how I look at it right now. Is that, you know what, sports is the one thing right now that is giving us something of a resemblance of normalcy right now. because of what has happened in just this year alone between a pandemic, social unrest, an election year that has just gotten uglier by the day.
Oh, it's going to get worse, my friend.
And it's going to get a lot worse. Just the division that we are seeing, and the fact that I remember, look, one of my old college roommates and I'm trying to wrap this up. I know we're running low on time. And what my old roommates and he's a Republican. I'm liberal as it gets, but I'm not a Democrat per se. But we get along great, and we disagree. But at the end of the day, we respect each other, and we're not even at that point in our society anymore where we could disagree on political views, but still respect each other at the end of the day as human beings who want the better for everyone. We're not even there anymore. I don't think we ever was, but we're certainly far away from that part of the equation.
Yeah.
And and like I said, like, we definitely right now we need sports more than ever. Not because we need something to watch for 3 hours. Not because we need the National Football League to keep us off of what's going on. We need it because these are the people we are looking to before. And I'm watching Anthony Lynn, who's a coach of the Chargers, before, during, and after, because we listen to what they have to say, whether it's X's and O's or whether, like I said, or in the case of Doc Rivers, if a 58-year-old man, he shouldn't have to be a black coach. Why can't he just be a coach at the end of the day?
Yep.
And that's where I said sports, sports can take the ball and just be the lead that everyone else can kind of look towards and say, okay, if they feel like we can do better, maybe we know we have to, and we need to take the steps to do just that.
Rabbi, I'm gonna hand it off to you with this. Anthony, here's hoping that by the time Lamar Jackson retires, the phrase black in front of the word quarterback is gone from the NFL society. And Rabbi, how far, and here's what gives me hope in terms of what sports can do for society, how far have we come from the days where Charles Barkley said athletes shouldn't be role models?
Okay, so I'm going to say this last point, and I would like no one to interrupt me here. Let me go.
Grab the floor.
Sports is a distraction to me. I think during this whole entire pandemic, doing these shows pretty much every Thursday since, it's been fun, it's been enjoyable, and sometimes it's been, I don't want to say I'll say uncomfortable. It's been uncomfortable to talk about. I truly believe that sports is a functional part of society and is the best way for athletes to get their message across. As I said before, anybody who is thinking that athletes should leave the bubble and go to their respective areas and do like what Jaylen Brown was doing and protesting in areas that were of high African American just plights and where there was like the most help needed. I think that help is still going to be there in the next month or two. I think the best way for people to put their message out there is to be there. So unselfishly, I think when the NFL starts again, when MLS starts again this weekend, when the WNBA starts again this weekend, I think the first thing people should see when they look at those broadcasts is to see that they care about social justice and that there needs to be a change in social justice, that a Black person and a white person should be treated equally when in the same situation, when we all know that doesn't happen. And that is 100% fact from what we've seen.
Mm-hmm.
So overall, I think I have friends, again, on both sides of the aisle, and I listen to everybody's points. And I don't block anybody, which is probably a mistake. I should block more. But I do feel uncomfortable in this situation, being so divided on a lot of topics. You've heard people kind of criticize me when I said not all Republicans are Trump Republicans tonight. And I think Trump has a lot more of the Republican base than people ought to believe.
I hope
So I know. This is what you said, though. This is kind of what was said, and I there's points on both sides I agree with. I would consider myself more independent than Democrat. So overall, I think sports provides me from not thinking about politics. I'll understand the message when I see it, but then for the 60 minutes of game time, I don't care, which is, I think, something that I need to kind of go out there for you. That's my selfish view of everything like that. So personally, for society, I think getting the message out is huge, and getting into not having us have these situations where a black man can get shot 7 times in the back whether he's armed or not, is hopefully those days can change. Again, I'm a pessimist. I don't think that it's going to be that easy, but this could be the first step. Even 2 days of a shutdown can be the first step.
Indeed.
And hopefully for, again, the world, we see change, and for ourselves, it is a distraction and we get a respite. But who the hell knows? Okay.
We'll see what tomorrow brings, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
For Jay Kaplan and Anthony Strait, my name is Stephen Rabinowitz. You can catch us on youtube.com/onthesportslines to see this show the next day. And you can catch us live like you are doing right now if you paid attention for the whole 2 hours. And if you have, thank you. At facebook.com/onthesportslines and our Twitter handle where you will see this again tomorrow.
At ONTH Sportslines.
All right. So next Thursday, since we're not going to kind of talk about this on the night of NFL's opening night, gentlemen, get ready for our NFL preview 2020.
Oh my God, that's right. September is the next show. We're right in front of the kickoff.
September is the next show. It'll be the week before the NFL starts because Labor Day is in a weird place this year.
That is right. Correct.
We get back to sports normalization next week, but this was a topic that needed to be discussed, and we're glad you could tune in or do whatever you do with this show. My name is Stephen Rabinowitz, and we'll see you next week.
Good night, everyone.